Welcome to your Intermediate Astrology for Integrated Healing Work 2019 class with Milada Sakic. So excited you are here and that you are joining me for this several weeks journey. It will likely be longer than that in terms of what you're going to be learning and integrating and applying, hopefully, as well in your life and business, if you'd like, and potentially an experience that will really shift your perspective on what is possible from the integration perspective of astrology and your healing, for sure, healing work, as well as really understanding how and why it would be important that we think from a more integrated perspective when we're studying astrological principles and concepts. Okay, so with that said, let's take a deep breath as always, and let's get started here because we've got a bit to cover. And here we go. Okay, so here we go. This is your introduction, or really introductory class that I'm calling your Astrology 101 Intermediate. So it's like a refresher on what I had found to be helpful for students at approximately this level of knowledge and application of astrology to know before we dive into more intermediate concepts. Okay, so I know that the line between beginner, intermediate, and advanced can be blurred in many ways, just because obviously there are different schools of astrology, different philosophies, right? So whether you've studied on your own, whether you have taken any classes, whether you have learned a lot of it intuitively as well, of course, we don't have the same benchmark here to be measuring that, but for that reason is my intention here with this recap, with this particular video before we get started with the class, is to bring us to some sort of point where we're going to be starting from an approximately similar point or point of view, at least. Okay, so with that in mind, let's get started. So welcome to Intermediate Astrology for Integrated Healing Work 2019. What are we going to cover in the next 7 weeks? You already have an idea, and so I'm just going to recap that here. So once again, we're right here. This is the intro class, Astrology 101. It's your intermediate refresher, basically really recapping on some of the beginner concepts, beginner to intermediate, and then bringing really the focus on what I would like you to focus in on. And in terms of what we're going to be deepening more of, so that you know, oh, okay, this is what I gotta just revisit a little bit before we dive deeper. Okay, so if you have taken Introduction to Intuitive Astrology with me, then probably about 70% of what we're gonna talk about today you're already familiar with. Of course, if you have taken other courses with me in the past, then a lot of this is going to be familiar here at this point. If you haven't, then maybe a lot of this is going, or maybe some of this is going to sound a little bit different, maybe, but it really is not that different in terms of the core principles and the concepts that are, from where I stand, really important to fundamentally have your any future astrological exploration and self-discovery to rest on. So I will be highlighting for you once again what I believe will be important for you to really start building those fundamentals on, if you haven't already, and what to focus in on. And obviously, as we continue on, I will be highlighting that along the way. So the next time we're going to be talking about the astrology of wholeness and your core energetic integrity keys for increasing vitality and overall integrity of your energetic container. Following that with the essential sun-moon energetic partnership in class 2 on your path of individuation to emerge as a transformational leader in your niche or niche, depending on your pronunciation. Number 3, we're going to be talking about, and actually starting from next class, and then the number 1, 2, 3, and pretty much all throughout, practical exercises. So it's not just going to be a discussion and principles to memorize, right? You'll always hear me say this is not about memorizing. If anything, I'm going to help you to think in particular terms that I'm hoping will be more helpful than ever if you're a healer, if you're a transformational leader, or if you're looking to step into that in a deeper and a more integrated way, right? It is an attempt to really bridge astrology and healing, okay, with a practical perspective as well. So the Sun-Mercury integration work for more focus and coherence will be one of those classes that will be important. We're going to be doing some practical exercises to help you understand the difference from a dimension of being between the solar consciousness and our busy mind perspective. Number 4, healing the father-mother image on your self-realization path, a big topic, and we're going to dive deeper and then also have a framework to follow, because it's a bigger topic that could take a whole course basically, and we will have obviously a class dedicated to that, and then bringing it through actually into number 5 class, healing the inner child and your womb experience, inborn memory. Number 6, creating practical daily astro protocols for your shadow integration, building healthy consistency, navigating resistance with more ease, and a whole lot more is what those protocols are going to help you to do and be. And the last one, the class number 7 on understanding transgenerational transmission keys and patterns from an astrological perspective. We're talking about trauma transmission primarily, but also inherited story, family myth, and the connection between the collective and individual healing. Okay, so there's a bit to cover. And if you are listening to this right now, right, the fact that you're listening to this is an energetic proof that you are meant to be here. And obviously, in particular, if at this point you are really feeling intrigued and fascinated and ready, as ready as you can be. Okay, so let's dive in. Once again, this is a recap, a refresher. So I will skim through, okay, some of the core and fundamental principles, just because some of you have not studied with me in the past, or may have not actually gone through a methodical sort of step-by-step understanding of really understand, you know, the birth chart, how to print the chart and things like that. But I'm not going to be spending a lot of time on that. Having said that, you're going to have these slides, obviously, and this video to rely on so that you can go back to it. So what is a natal or birth chart? You have heard that concept and name many times, meaning the same thing, right? Natal or birth chart, it's a map of the sky that's drawn for the moment of your birth. So literally, when in that moment of your birth, right, if we were to freeze that moment, that position of the planets in the sky, right, in the solar system, that's primarily what we're looking at, right, from the perspective of the relationship between the sun, the moon, the earth, and really all the other planets in the solar system. And then project that, right, onto literally like here on Earth, and if you'd like a flat surface, right, that chart that we actually print out, That is what we're referring to when we say a natal or a birth chart. So it's a map of the sky that's drawn for the moment of your birth, that moment when you take that first breath in after the umbilical cord is cut typically. And okay, right, there is that celestial influx of energies that is relevant in so many ways for your unfolding, your discovery, your purpose here, and your mission, and really the journey towards wholeness is what I believe. So yes, we're going to talk about really how, and why that wholeness is important, obviously from a vitality and well-being perspective, but also from a perspective of your total expression of soul and self. So also what we see in the chart is all these energetic dynamics. And this, probably of all the classes that I've done so far, we're going to have the time here and willingness to dive into that ever deeper so that we can really not just see and explore, but hopefully really experience that energetics in real time. Obviously, some of that is going to be through this particular interaction, and then also through our Q&As, if you're taking the course during the time when I'm offering that, right, in a sacred and safe and confidential group environment. And then also, very importantly, what do you do on your own? Okay, and for that, I'm going to be providing you some frameworks and some tools and interpretation tools, and also, once again, the guidelines how to combine your astrological savvy with your healing wisdom and tools. Okay, so yes, we can also see, we're going to talk about the importance of polarities, integrating polarities and paradoxes, and so on and so forth. Our belief system is, we can see our blind spots, our potentially our assumptions, and a lot of that stuff that we bring from previous lifetime, and then also potentially we can see even beyond that. So we'll chat about that as well, in particular when we talk about the nodes, okay, as one of the important integration keys. The moon's nodes, or the lunar nodes, or the nodes of the moon as they are known. Okay, so, and then how we relate to these different aspects of the self, these different aspects of our soul's expression, these different levels of consciousness that we have access to, and different dimensions of psyche. Of course, in particular from that fundamental perspective of obviously not just physical, but the emotional, mental, and spiritual, right? Those four fundamental aspects, or bodies, if you'd like, but of course, knowing that we have many more, and then working with that archetypally to bring more consciousness to these different dimensions of our psyche that are in a continuous relationship already, and conversation, and in some cases, maybe not always a harmonious conversations, but this is going to be really a journey to help you bring these different dimensions of your psyche into a more conscious and harmonious conversation, okay, so that you can feel more integrated within yourself as a whole being that you already are. Okay, and a deep breath. Okay, so we got an understanding of a natal chart, right? So there is, of course, a whole lot more, and a whole lot more that you're also going to be receiving intuitively as you listen to this information, and also transmission as we go through this step by step. And once again, it's a refresher today, so I'm going to be going through a little bit now faster, but also focusing in on what will be important for you to highlight and keep in mind. So if you've taken the Intuitive Astrology, Introduction to Intuitive Astrology, and other courses where we focus a little bit more on the energetics of our design, and we're going to be doing that here as well. And beyond this introduction, by the way, I wanted to introduce you here to this more holistic perspective to looking at a chart, okay, at your natal chart and your, what I like to call your geometry, okay, your cosmic design or your cosmic geometry. And then also, as you're going to notice, I'm going to be guiding you to move through from the holistic to specific, right? Or from the right brain, left brain perspective. So logical, and then experiential and emotional, okay, and or intuitive. And then also from, right, so the detail to, again, a more holistic perspective, from one part of the polarity to the other, so that we are really seeing where we want to be on that continuum, and then choosing that for yourself. Now, from a cosmic design perspective, what I'm talking about is the first moment when you look at a chart, whether it's yours or your loved ones or your clients, right? That first, there is the energy there that is going to just come through that chart. Now, there is the whole really more energy and consciousness that is going to come through when you actually are doing a live reading, because as we've shared in the beginning, the chart is it's a whole lot of a map. So it's a map in all the abundant sense of the wealth of wisdom that it contains. And yet there is a paradox there as well, that I also am going to help remind you that it is just a map as well. Okay, it is just really a record of the moment, really, of our birth. So it really is this alchemy, or the interaction between the live consciousness behind it, right? So whether, again, it's your client, whether it's you, obviously, and really what that map uncovers is where really the true experiential component of this interaction on your own, right? Or your self-discovery starts, or obviously in when we're talking about it in the class. So just to give you an example of that is, for example, when you look at a map of an actual geographic location, right? Any map of anything, but say it's a map of where you're living right now, the city where you're living, right? Or even the particular location that, you may be looking for right now. Like, let's say you're looking for a particular new place to discover in your city, and you're looking at a map. So the map is a two-dimensional navigational tool, right? Or two or three-dimensional, depends on how you look at it. And but when you actually get to the place, it's a whole lot more. It's a whole lot more than the map. Now, that's a little bit of a rudimentary explanation to what and how I experience a natal chart. I do experience it a whole lot more than a map. And this is going to be your own, I experience it as a mandala, as a really sacred tool for accessing these really ways that you can and are meant to actualize yourself. So we do experience it, I believe, as a whole lot more than the map. But I also want you to remember that there is a whole more to who we are. I know, and as somebody who studied this for almost 3 decades now, and obviously practiced and have taught astrology, I am humbled ever more every time I teach another course, how much more we can really go and bring the essential and the fundamental understanding to the archetypes, and distilling here what is really important, and then also really being in awe of the complexity of it. Okay, so anyway, we're going to look at a couple of charts here as an example. What I mean by this, but I really, and obviously, if you have studied with me in several classes, we have talked about that, and you may have experienced that as well. So that is the invitation here, is at this point, and in particular from the next class, and I will be inviting you to do that, is to be willing to see things from both the left brain and the right brain perspective. So as I'm sharing and you're looking at a chart, what is coming through intuitively, okay? And how are you making these connections and really trusting, as I've got here, see the design, trust the design from your current perspective. Yes, we're going to have biases. Yes, we're going to have our own filter to look at, things from. But there is a value. Our perception is valuable even as we grow. Even, when you're looking at your own chart or somebody else's chart, because it's your own dimensions of your psyche, meaning your sun, moon, Venus, Mars, wherever they are, that it is an important perspective to have. Anyway, with all of that said, let's now dive in here. What is this organizing principle here? So I'm going to touch on that, and then I've mentioned here, and you have heard me say that before, right? You may have come across the principles connected with or mentioned as chart patterns, and also planetary configurations such as the Grand Trine, Grand Cross, T-square, and then chart patterns such as bundle, locomotive, bucket. I know some of those interesting and maybe unusual names. So not to worry about those. I know those are taught in a lot of classes, even how I have studied. But in what I am meant to here bring through for you, if you are on any level interested in really learning things from a really sacred geometry perspective and really more a richer context, I believe it's really, really helpful to bring that intuitive dynamic and not being so tied into how other people are calling certain patterns. Okay. Having said, there is value to that, and I will probably rely on that naming at some point, but also inviting you to think bigger. Okay. So cosmic design here of Angelina Jolie's chart, a chart that I oftentimes use in my classes because it is in many cases, a very textbook example of how astrology works, and yet also because of a lot of the valuable work that she has done, and also, as we're going to explore even more in this particular class, in my humble opinion, how she integrates masculine and the feminine. Okay, so all of that said, let's just take a deep breath here, and I want you to just stop listening to my voice for a moment, actually, and if you'd like, maybe even at this point, stop the video. And if you're looking at the slide, okay, you have likely downloaded the slides. At this point, I want you to just, without my input, pay attention to the design. So just the geometry, maybe take a step back, and I want you to just trust that first, really, whatever it is, whether it's a sensation, whether it's an image, whether it's just some sort of sense of awe, maybe like, oh my goodness, first time that I'm even looking or thinking about that geometry in that particular way, and just, see the design and trust the design. Okay, so just take a moment to be with that. And I have already, now, if you're either listening to this again or continuing this discovery now, I have highlighted here, I've circled obviously the sun and the moon, and here actually there's a group of 3 planets, which we're going to be exploring more. And so I want you to just pay attention how in this particular design, there is a particular geometry. Okay, so obviously there is more than what here maybe comes at you, or what comes through at first, but I want you to pay attention to a couple of, or 2, 3 things. So the overall geometry, where your eye is drawn, okay, and where you're maybe noticing a certain, what I like to call, organizing principle. Okay, so you can see here how there's a lot of like these supporting lines, for example, that are leading to this grouping of 3 planets. Okay, and then also any particular energetic information that's coming through in terms of what you need to know about that in this moment. What we're going to find later on is, so what you're going to be receiving is not even, because the design that you're looking at, the cosmic design, is always going to interact with your own. So even when you're looking at, for example, here, as we're going to learn, the grouping or group of planets in the sign of Aries, it is very much going to, every time you interact with that energy, it is going to have some sort of information for you as well. And yet, obviously, when we're reading for others, it is important to first of all, be aware of our own relationship with that energy and work on integrating that and healing that on many levels that we have access to. So part of that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing that, then also bringing more awareness and consciousness to some of the fundamental integration keys and principles, such as the solar and the lunar, and so on and so forth. So as you can see here, you can see that symbol with the circle and the dot in the middle. That's the symbol for the sun. And then here, this crescent moon, the symbol for the moon. So both of the solar and the lunar principles are part of this geometry for Angelina Jolie. And I'll leave it at that, okay? Okay, so Carl Jung or Carl Jung, depending on what language and you're pronouncing his name and last name, is also one of the examples that I oftentimes use as very fascinating in terms of his design. Okay, and by the way, we're going to be looking at more of how to really incorporate that a little bit later on and throughout this particular course as well. So once again, a deep breath. So just for a moment, forget about the signs and planets per se, and just focus on the geometry. Okay, and even tune out if you'd like here, stuff that I have written out on the side of the slide. And so just notice here, right, at the geometry of it, there's some blue lines, right? There is some green here and red. And what is this, if anything, bringing up for you in terms of the shape, the form, the design, and what and how are you interpreting this, if at all? So don't rush rather into any interpretation at this moment, because we are just really very much exploring the concept of geometry or planetary geometry. Okay, so we're not necessarily engaging the logical mind just yet at this point. We do that a lot in our day-to-day, right? So there will be a bit here to logically take in as well and process. And once again, if you'd like, you can stop the video at this point and just be with this design for a moment, okay? So at this point, again, you may recognize some of the symbols, right? Archetypal symbols and astrological symbols that you may have come across before. But once again, at this point, I just want you to notice the geometry if you'd like. So for example, I do have here, from where I stand, it looks like a pyramid, like a 3D pyramid design. Now, there does seem to be more than that, but it offers a particular perspective from where I stand into what this pyramid design, if that's what you want to call it. Now, you may see something else, and so please allow that. And you may see something else today, by the way, and something new, completely new may come through next month. Okay, so again, see the design, trust the design. And what are the possible associations? So at this point, I want you to just explore what are the possible associations and the meaning of a pyramid, okay? So we're talking here any associations with, obviously, with that your logical mind can draw from that, and then also anything that intuitively may be coming through. And notice. So just notice any sensation, anywhere in your body your awareness may be drawn to, pay attention and just acknowledge it, okay? And if you'd like at this point, if there is information that's coming through because you may have looked at this before or this particular chart, you can make some notes as well and then come back to that. Again, we're not interpreting at this point, right? We're not giving it any meaning. We're just, if anything, honoring really the design and what it is that we can glean out of really this, to me, a phenomenal aspect of doing this work and really working with these amazing tools that, I mean, just look at that, right? The Dalai Lama's chart. And again, a deep breath, and I want you to just, right here in honor of Dalai Lama, and obviously knowing what we know, a whole lot, right? The chances are you know a whole lot about Dalai Lama, and you may have some sort of personal preference and or a belief and obviously a knowledge about his spirituality and his work in the world. But I'm going to ask you once again just to put that aside just for a moment. And if you like, again, stop this video and just have a maybe 10, 20, 30-second moment with this design, okay? What does this look like? What is this bringing up? Even if you're at this point, you're like, oh my God, I've never looked at the geometry of an astrological chart in this particular way, that is okay. You can have some sort of a note, a piece of paper or a journal that you can just maybe jot some notes here or even draw things. If you are at this point, as oftentimes I am, so just continually, perpetually fascinated by the geometry and the energetics of how the geometry and different aspects of it, these different organizing principles and dimensions of our psyche, how they communicate and really what are they calling us to become more conscious of. Just notice if you're drawn to make any notes or even draw any particular geometry, as in replicating it on a piece of paper, just so that you can get some sort of deeper understanding of it, okay? And a deep breath here. So I did make a note here, right? So you likely are seeing here a, what we can call at a fundamental level. We can see a triangle, right? And we can see actually two triangles here. Maybe you're even seeing more, okay? And then can you see what I see? This particular, an arrow and a bow. Yes, there is, and this just phenomenal, this focusing, I'm going to say, element, right, of what we could say here represented by that. It really is a part of the geometry, of the planetary geometry, that it has that focusing element, right, between this moon, Neptune here, as we're going to learn, and Saturn. We're going to look at Dalai Lama's chart later on and how relevant is this third and the ninth house here, focusing perspective. And when you look at this design, and you may have seen it, you may even have it in your chart. This is not just reserved for Dalai Lama. Let me make that clear. And yet, obviously, he is bringing it through in a particular way, right? I've got here the step 2 of looking at the design is also what is the leader here of the geometry, if you like, that organizing principle, okay? And we're going to explore this a little bit later on as well as to, so the fact that this is what appears to be here organized around the sun from my perspective. Now, you may see something different, and please honor and trust that, or at least even if you like, be in curiosity whether it's making sense. We're going to learn that it's not just because this is the sun, but also because this very important point of every chart is this, that's marked by AC here at about 9 a.m., right? On the left-hand side also is very relevant here, as well as if you like, this, not just the organizing principle, but what the chart or what the geometry seems to be aligning with as well. This is the most important angle in a chart, is this ascendant, the first house cusp, and then also this particular, what I like to call your core relationship axis. We will talk about that later on, okay, more. So, okay, so I've got some notes here. Just keep it, we're not interpreting at this point, right? We're just working with what is available. So, with that said, I've got some notes here and a couple of slides on how to print your natal chart. The chances are you have already done that at some point in your journey to get to here. And if you haven't done that, if you haven't worked with Astro.com, I'm going to highly encourage you to do that, just because a lot of, or really most of the charts, if not all of them. There may be some additional ones that I use with other software that I use, but most of the charts are going to be from astro.com. So it just helps to be using the same tools. So it's going to be easier because their colors are going to play into that, and other things such as the defaults. And I will share that with you in the next class, just a little bit more about how to, what defaults I suggest to have so that you show different elements of a chart that are important. That may be the general default. Then if you don't choose that, may not necessarily serve the purposes of the class. So with that said, here are the instructions. Really going to that astro.com extended chart selection page. And then if you like changing here the setting to 75% so that the chart can best fit on one printed side or really one printed page, and I'm choosing the natal chart wheel under the chart type. Okay, so this is if you're more visual, as both, or maybe both visual, and also you like the instructions, right? So that will be found right here under the drawings and calculations part of their menu here under extended chart selection. You can actually print the natal chart here by choosing natal chart ascendant option that's just above it, but I'm pointing you to the extended chart selection just because there are many other charts there that we're going to be using and you're going to be using potentially as you get to love astro.com as I do. Even with using the professional astrological software, I still come back to and use astro.com a lot, and I'm so grateful to it. Okay, so when you get to the extended chart selection, you're going to enter your information here. I do suggest to choose not just the guest user option, but also a member, like a registered member or something like that option, so that it actually saves your information, because the chances are going to be adding more charts here. And then click to show the chart here, the natal chart. We'll leave all the other defaults for now as they are. Okay, and then this slide shows you now, once you have printed the chart and it's going to appear on the screen, is what I like to do is also have, whether I'm working getting ready for a client session and or if I am collecting certain collection of charts, just so that it's easier to have it organized in a certain way. Obviously, when I'm creating classes such as this one, is to save it, to copy and save it into a digital format in what I suggest in a Word document. Just it's easier to work with it, I find, when you can copy and paste it into a Word document rather than working with it as a JPEG or an image. Okay, so you're going to left click to open an image. It's going to just open a new window, and then right click to save and or copy that. I suggest to copy and then put it into a document. So this way you can save several charts in that document. It's just easier. You know, if the astro.com ever is down, you have a copy of the chart and so on and so forth. Okay. Ta-da! With that said, we're going to just go very quickly through the astrological symbols. Many of these you may have already seen, or you may be already familiar with most of them, if not all of them. Just to point here, the fact that we've got the 12 signs here on one side, and then we have the rulers of each of the sign on the other. So hence there is a repetition here, for example, of Saturn and Mercury and Venus, because we have certain planets that, from a traditional perspective, and I'll talk about that a little bit today, are we're going to be using primarily as the directors and rulers of each of the 12 signs. Okay, and a deep breath. So we've got Aries, right? So I'm going to point to the symbol here. So Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo. This is your symbol for Libra. Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. And then right here, I've got Mars as the ruler of Aries. Venus rules Taurus, Mercury, Gemini. Moon is the ruler of Cancer, the sun of Leo. Mercury also rules Virgo, right? So there's a dual rulership of Mercury, both Virgo and Gemini. Now, Venus also rules Libra. So both Libra and Taurus, of course. And now Mars is the traditional ruler of Scorpio, and that is what I'm going to suggest to use, and I will explain today in this refresher and a recap as to why. Obviously, if you've studied with me in the past, then you know that already. And then we're going to use a so-called modern ruler, which is Pluto, as the co-ruler. And I will explain as to why. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, Saturn rules both Capricorn, and the primary ruler of Capricorn, and also a traditional or the primary ruler of Aquarius. But Aquarius is also ruled by Uranus, okay? And then Jupiter also rules Pisces, as well as Sagittarius. Do not try and memorize this. This is just to get introduced and maybe hear something for the first time and maybe for the second time that is ready to land here, in a deeper way, or get, integrated. And here also we've got the symbols for North Node and South Node, which you're going to come across in the chart. We will talk about that. We will touch on Chiron through some examples, and we're not going to talk about Black Moon Lilith in this particular course. I haven't actually in any of my courses, but you may come across it. So just so that you can recognize the symbol. And then these are the symbols for Uranus and Neptune and Pluto as a so these are so-called modern rulers or sign co-rulers of Aquarius, Pisces, and Scorpio. So basically, wherever you have Aquarius, Pisces, and Scorpio, it adds another layer of complexity by having these so-called modern planets that were discovered the latest, right, in our consciousness and in our history. And we talk more about the meaning and how relevant they are in terms of the collective evolution and generational patterns. We will talk about that. We will talk about that in this course as well towards the end more. But for now, just the symbol and just sort of getting introduced to the idea of a little bit of the importance of correlating as well the planets and signs that have a natural affinity and or rulership with them. Now, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, there are two symbols for Pluto. This is one of them. Actually, there is a different one you're going to see in the chart, but a lot of modern charts have used this symbol. So anyway, we will get to explore that. And here we're not going to talk a lot about the actual planetary aspects, but I will refer to it more from the energetics. So I'm going to be teaching you more about the aspects from the energetics. I find this is one of the areas where students get a little bit like, oh my goodness, right? Aspects are a little bit more trickier. I really want you to, this is one of the core purposes of the class, is that we're going to be going into the fundamentals, the archetypes, the primary, the core energetics that we really need to understand and feel and work with, that I find in a lot of classes and maybe in a lot of ways of how the information, the astrological wisdom and knowledge is transmitted. There is a lot more focus on, and this is how I've learned as well, on the techniques and information. And while there will be information, we don't need to be jumping into some of the advanced principles before we actually see as to why, right? Before you notice it, just as we have done with looking at the geometry of a chart, the design. Okay, so this is, anyway, so that you get introduced to that. This is a symbol for conjunction. I'll show you the aspectarian, right? So that you can start recognizing that. The trine, sextile, these are your harmonious aspects, symbol for a degree. Opposition is square, your more activating dynamic aspects, part of fortune. We're not going to be talking about, but you will find this symbol and a symbol for retrograde. We will touch on that one way or the other. Okay, so you have already seen this in many beginner classes with me, and even intermediate, as I just want to make sure that at this point, again, whatever practice and experience and study level you have been at, that you can, at this point, if you haven't already, if you don't have a full or as full as you can familiarity with all the 12 sign symbology, that you take a moment now and do that. So maybe you already know a number of these symbols, right? So starting with Aries, once again, actually the signs go in the clockwise motion, so or direction. So Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. So what I'm going to invite you right now is to print out your natal chart and then just simply write out these 12 signs. If you do not have a full recognition, right, of all the 12 signs. If you already have most of them and you're like, oh, Milada, maybe I need to kind of, maybe you're mixing up like Scorpio and Virgo, or, you know, Aries and Taurus or something like that, then still print it out and then just write out the ones and maybe circle and highlight the ones that you really want to reaffirm. Okay, it will be helpful, obviously, to know the language and the symbols before we dive in further. Now, that is, especially if you are at a more beginner to intermediate level, it's very important to do that exercise. Now, we have already done this in the introduction to intuitive astrology, and if you have, great. If you want to do it again, absolutely go ahead. Now, if you're a little bit more at an intermediate level already, okay, so if you're at an intermediate level already, and or you've got your, you understand you can recognize the signs at this point, where it just feels to you like you know enough, okay? So it's not about what I say and that you even need to again memorize or anything of all the symbols, because you're going to learn them one way or the other. But what is important is how you feel within, so you will know, right, intuitively and just energetically speaking, when you tune in, if there's like, oh, I wish, right, I could know more. I do. If you're like struggling a little bit to see and recognize the zodiac circle and to have an understanding of what it is, at least, you know, 50, 60, 70% of it, then, you know, do this once again. Writing this out. So at this point, if you're at an intermediate level, and so I'm going to suggest to do this at this point, at least to write out the signs and planets. Okay, so by using, right, obviously the slides that I've just shared a few slides back. So you obviously have got your signs and then the planets. So basically just as I've done here, right, I circled Saturn and then I wrote Saturn there. Okay, so you're going to do that for the rest of the planets. Now the chart is going to get likely busy, and you can obviously print that out separately to do, depending on how your brain likes the information, right? I no longer, as you've heard me say before, I no longer print out very, very rarely. In fact, I can't remember the last time that I printed a chart, just because obviously I worked with it for so long, and I also try to minimize printing for, you know, green consciousness perspective, eliminating paper. However, wherever you are, if you are learning now, and it's very helpful, I did it for many, many years, and I loved making notes on the chart and you know, working with different symbols. Very, very important then to honor that, because if you skip this step and we dive in, you're still going to be able to get a lot out of the information, but this is the basics of what we call the alphabet, right? Of then that everything else is going to be communicated in. Okay, so yes, there's the energetic part, but the alphabet is helpful to understand. Now, if you already do know, you're like, oh, what? I know my signs, I know my planets, or at least most of them. Then I'm going to ask you to write out, to circle here so that you are clear where the beginning of the cusps, and I'm actually going to go into that in a moment just so that you are clear where the chart starts, right? The first cusp, the second cusp, the first house, the second house. Okay, these are some of the most frequent questions that I receive when I'm writing, when I'm teaching, particularly when I'm writing, and then sharing stuff about eclipses and new moons and full moons. People, those that have not studied with me, asking, how do I read a chart, right? Well, where is it, you know, is it the first house? Which is, you know, phenomenal. A whole lot more people are using astro.com and are, you know, making an effort to understand. But it is a little tricky unless we have gone through an exercise such as this one and or a class to say, okay, that's where the chart starts. and I'll dive into that in a moment. Okay, so obviously 12 cusps, right? 12 houses. We'll talk about that a little bit more here. And then now, if you are at this point have just taken recently the beginner, or based on what I've just described, you're like, okay, I've got my work cut out for me, you know, symbols and planets and the cusps. And at this point, you're like, okay, I'm tuning you out. I don't want to know about the rulerships, okay, because they are a little bit more, the next layer here. Then skip this part for right now, okay? You're going to be able to get back to this, and I would rather that you learn through the examples rather than trying to layer this on top of the information that you may have just recently started studying, such as, again, the basic alphabet of astrology. If, however, you are at a intermediate to maybe even intermediate to advanced level, or like strong, you've got strong fundamentals, and you already have been introduced either through studying with me or elsewhere the concept of rulerships, and you're ready for that next step, then for you, you're going to work on this part here as well, and add beside your cusp, you can add, for example, here you would have Aquarius, just as I've done here actually. So Aquarius, you can put 8H for 8th house, right? It's the 8th cusp. This is where the 8th house starts. And then ruler Saturn, co-ruler Uranus. 9th house, right? Pisces, 9H, ruler Jupiter, co-ruler Neptune. 10th house, MC stands for 10th house, right? So Aries, 10H, ruler Mars, and then so on and so forth, okay? Now, this is not actually taught in many, even intermediate classes, unfortunately, or maybe not from this traditional perspective. So a lot of astrologers have adopted a very modern perspective of using Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto as the primary rulers of Pisces, Aquarius, and Scorpio. But I'm going to go into why I have found in my years of experience and studying why it is important for more precision. Basically gives us more precision to use the traditional rulers. Okay, so if at this point you're like, oh, I'm not hearing you at this point, right, just skip, or just basically skip to the next part here and skip the rulerships. I totally appreciate that this can be a little bit much right now, but it is so important, and it's going to add so much depth to your astrological learning journey earlier on, rather than learning this in some advanced level and then being introduced to it for the first time. So now here is just another way to determine planetary ruler of a house or a cusp, right? So Aries ruled by Mars and so on. So we already have looked at that. I've got here, I've highlighted Mars as ruler of Scorpio, and I did not highlight Pluto, right? But it's important. We love our Pluto, right? I have Pluto rising, so very important. But it's a collective consciousness planet. Mars is here a personal, which we're going to learn more and more why it is important that we bring it here again into the primary rulership of Scorpio and Aries, and similar with Saturn and Jupiter for Aquarius and Pisces. Okay, and this particular is a wheel, obviously, that it has signs in the inner circle, and then the rulers of the traditional rulers, the so-called traditional or classical, meaning the ancient astrology, right? How the ancient astrologers since the ancient times, and still a lot of so-called classical and traditional, and a lot of modern astrologers as well, are using as the main directors. Some people call them lords. In the ancient times, they were referred to as the lords of a sign. So you will hear me say the ruler, or a director, or the boss of the house, okay? And we will explore later on as to why that is important. And then Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto as so they're in the outer circle, okay? Just another way of looking at that information. There is here, just for your reference, I'm not going to get into this now, the most important essential dignities and rulerships. And I'm going to be redefining a lot of this, and you've already heard me talk about that, right? I don't use the term detriment and fall, except for just referencing so that you have a reference point when we're talking about Sun in Aquarius, Moon in Capricorn, because a lot of astrology out there refers to it in such a way. I refer to those planets as contrarian when a planet is in a sign that's opposite of its natural rulership. But we will be talking more about that later on. If anything, just get familiarized. If you'd like, remind yourself what really is the domicile or the rulership of each of the sign. And again, if at this point you're like, okay, this is it with rulerships, skip this part, okay? But just that you can, because you're going to be, the idea here is you're going to be getting back to this information later on, right? Throughout the journey. You're not just going to be watching this video once, the chances are, okay, more than once. So every next time that you watch it, there will be more as you learn more, even as you are, as we move on and so on and so forth. So from the intermediate perspective, okay, just now a visual of a chart, and once again, just helping you here to discern and recognize the important points. And I'm actually going to be even zooming in even more, because we're really going to today get clear. I want you to, if you get one thing out of today, is where the ascendant is in a chart, okay, the ascendant, and then the sun and the moon, which we're going to be exploring more in the next class video. So say in the Dalai Lama's chart, right, we have, this is a sign for Cancer, so this is referred to as a Cancer rising or Cancer ascendant, AC or ASC. You will see referred to as the rising sign or the ascendant. And then you see here where I've circled number 2 in a red circle, right? This is where the cusp of his second house starts. So between the first and the second house, there will be a cusp, basically like a borderline. This is an invisible borderline. There is no such thing in the sky, but ancients have found that when the planets are in a particular part of the sky, they seem to exhibit or have more personalized characteristics that are more reserved for that part of the sky, if you like, when that planet is in, let's say, above horizon, or in the southern part of the chart, and so on and so forth. So, or the sky, and the chart as a result. So, second cusp, right? The third cusp, and here when we're saying there's Dalai Lama has a Leo on the second house cusp, that you can gradually start from this day forward, start in translating that in your mind to Sun being the ruler of the second house. In his case, it's also the ruler of the third, because he also has Leo there. Okay. He's got Sagittarius in the 6th, so Jupiter rules Sagittarius and his 6th house. And Jupiter rules also Pisces on his 10th. So we'll obviously see this futurist through the number of examples today and in future classes of this course. Okay. Our solar system, you have seen me include some solar system pictures of our really immediate, right, nearby neighborhood cosmos. And so the reason is going to be basically multifold, and that's going to be to remind us, so because we can get so stuck in looking at the charts that we can forget as to, and obviously if you have an opportunity to go out and get a little bit more intimate with the sky, and if you live in such an area where you can watch the night sky and know where the planets' planetary movements are, and so on and so forth, and the constellations and so on, that would be ideal. If not, and then as we're studying, because there will be some astronomical important basically elements, astronomically speaking, that we are going to be referring to, no astronomy, but just as very, very fundamental, such as, for example, the mass and size of a planet and its closeness to the Earth, and this particular, what we call here, the inner planets, or sometimes referred to the inner sky, or inner sky more from an inner perspective, part of the solar system. So we have the sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and you can see Moon here and Mars. And then we have the so-called asteroid belt, which are, these are like huge rocks that are here moving in this particular part of the sky that basically separates, or if you like, bridges, depends on how you look at it, the inner sky or the inner planets, or also referred to as the personal planets, with now the social, right? Jupiter, Saturn, the two largest planets in the solar system, after obviously our star, the sun, and then Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and then we've got more dimensions here of the solar system, and even newest planets that have been discovered. Okay, deep breath. So just a little bit of a recap here as to why we're using classical astrology rules. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot here, but you know, I am recommending now at the intermediate level, and the most definitely at the advanced level, any other course that you take that sort of a natural progression after this one, is going to be growingly important. And even with this class, to at least try it. If you have worked with Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto as the primary rulers of Aquarius and Pisces and Scorpio, and this is challenging your astrological paradigm, I'm going to invite you to consider it, to keep an open mind, and to use it for the duration of this 7 week, and maybe even a little bit longer, and then make your own conclusions as to what will work for you. Because if you're anything like me, I like to say, but why, and then also try to understand why, and why am I using that particular, whether it's technique or an understanding, and then actually work with that, right? So analyze, use, if you look at Mars as the ruler of that Scorpio, right, part of your chart, and Saturn as ruler of both Capricorn and Aquarius, how is that adding a particular either depth and a precision to understanding the, if you like, the potential of that area of your chart. So you want to see that in your own, it might be in your loved ones, and then obviously the examples that we're going to be using. So this is the key. The planet that rules the house is the planet that rules the sign on the house cusp. Planets in the houses are secondary guests. So that's the core here, whole principle of this. Oftentimes in astrology, there's a lot of focus on planets in the houses, but they're guests, they're co-rulers, you could say. They're, you know, they're important, but they're more there in the environment of here and under the jurisdiction of whatever planet rules that particular house. Like we just looked at Dalai Lama, so if you recall, Cancer rising, and right, ruled by Moon, his first house representing Dalai Lama. And then the second ruled by the Sun, and the third. So any planet in the second and the third are under the jurisdiction there, meaning the Sun sets the stage and the rules in whatever way you want to hear that and understand that. But we will use that, we're not going to be discussing the concept anymore beyond this one-on-one, but we are going to be relying on it, okay? So that just so you can know why, and I'm using the classical sign, and why I'm recommending for you to do the same. So classical rulers as primary sign rulers and modern planets as co-rulers, because Mars is 500 times as massive as Pluto. And as if you can imagine, the more massive a planet and the closer it is to the Earth, right, it does say a lot about its potential electromagnetic and energetic influence, right, to the Earth and really any planets that are close to it. Jupiter rules Pisces and Sagittarius. It is 20 times as massive as Neptune, and Saturn is 6 times as massive as Uranus. And then there is other component here, and that's the visibility. The ancients were, and as we are today, right, the so-called visible sky is the first so-called 7 planets, which is from Sun to Saturn. We actually need Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which is why ancients haven't been able, they didn't see, they may have known, they may have even calculated the existence, just as we're now calculating the existence of the you know, the black holes and the other planets, the new planets that are then being discovered later on. But we do need a telescope to see Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and that tells you something about what capacity we need to utilize here in order to tap into the consciousness that they invite us to become aware of, right? That dimension of our psyche, and in particular the collective perspective, because they're collective planets. Okay, so just a little bit of a visual of that. And just look at that, right? The Saturn here compared to Uranus, Jupiter compared to Neptune. So, I mean, of course, you know, size is not everything, but from a gravitational perspective, it does matter, and scientists know that. Okay. Ta-da! Now we're going to dive into a little bit about the fundamental energetics. So now we've gone from the geometry into the alphabet, right? Some of the affinities, and if you like, rulerships here between the signs and the planets, because there is a connection. Now we're going to be looking here at summarizing the fundamental, like they're like the blueprints of energy, just different 4 primary types of the energy or the energetics that exist in the physical as well in their more physical form, if you like, such as fire, air, earth, and water. But here, when we're talking about it from a primordial, if you like, or the blueprint perspective, the archetypal perspective, we're actually talking about it more from a vibrational or energetic. Okay. But do rely on your 3D, if you like, understanding of where do we find these elements in the nature. But I'm also going to be inviting you, importantly, so that we can experience these elements as well as we talk about them and then also work with them. So there are 12 primary energy patterns, which are the signs. We will summarize those as well in terms of their core meanings. And they're divided into 4 categories. So the 12 signs are not all different. I mean, they do absolutely have, every one of them has super relevant perspective and energetic about it, and an evolutionary strategy, if you like, too, and its unique pattern. But there are actually categories and groups. Okay, so here I've got this Stephen Arroyo, one of the well-known astrologers, saying vital forces that make up the entire creation, and they are the elements. So the vital forces that make up the entire creation. So they represent the levels of consciousness and being, or really at their more expansive, if you like, really at that more energetic template level. Okay, because the planets represent really more dynamic level of consciousness, more focused in, and if you like, more specific and dimension of our psyche as a result. But when we're talking about elements, we are looking at, you want to be really just tuning in as to, are you getting more energized when we're talking about the fire, right? Does it feel more cooling and or warming, or whatever it is that it may feel when you're talking about air, water, and how does it feel to be tuning into the energy of earth? So we've got here, fire and air are more self-expressive, extroverted, active, and expressed more consciously, so levity, masculinity, if you like, and a yang, there's a yang element to them. And then earth and water are more self-repressive and contained, introverted, passive, reflective, expressed more unconsciously, and more connected with gravity, in particular earth, right? Inertia, feminine, and the yin. Now, these are some of the fundamental understanding of the elements. We're going to really expand on this in a way that are going to allow us to apply this as well, so that we're not going to be tied into, you're not going to hear me oftentimes refer to the masculine, the feminine. I'm going to be more using the core energetic reference, that for integration in a more specific terms, such as the solar and lunar consciousness, okay, or Venus, Mars, and then just because there are different expressions of that masculine masculine, and then also that we can sort of really see it more from a holistic perspective, because there is so much gender-based potentially framework that we still, even if we have a spiritual understanding of it, that we still ascribe to masculine and feminine, right? And that is actually what I want you to be able to at a more fundamental level understand what we're talking about. What level of masculine and why? What does that really mean in terms of, right, energy, in terms of its activity, in terms of its strategy, if you like, and what does it really, what wisdom does it hold for us? So here are our 4 elements: so fire, earth, air, water. So fire stands for, or really just feels like that life force energy. Oftentimes we refer to these these 3 signs: Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, and also 1st, 5th, and the 9th house. These are 1st, 5th, and the 9th sign, and also 1st, 5th, and the 9th house, and I'll have slides on that as well, as the life houses. And so I'm going to invite you now. You can stop the video here, or just a brief moment, and just really connect in here with the fire medicine. And we will talk more about the elements and their application when we talk about sun, moon, and so on and so forth. Now we're just learning here about this quality of fire, right? As of the radiant light, of this, this sort of spirited enthusiasm and a willpower that feels energizing, inspiring, activating, and we connect passion and warming to that quality. Earth is about physicality, your Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, right? So we're talking more physical terms, body, matter, what matters most, right, to us, and also what materializes in, or what is asking to be more shaped and boundaried, right? Capricorn, more in integrity, more structured. This is our earth element, and working with Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, right? There's more physical form, physical needs. We're talking about sensation, tangible, practical, and stable. Now we're going to talk about different categorization here as well, because there are some earth and other signs that are going to feel more of that stable and dependable, if you like, quality than others that are more mutable. Air, we connect with our mental body, and right, so physicality obviously was with the body, and fire with the spirit body, and it's the etheric body, and then air with the mental body, the concept of knowledge, social connection, idea sharing, right, that we use to conceptualize things, to work with abstract concepts, and that would be Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. If you have any planets in Gemini, Libra, Aquarius, or any other points in your chart, you are likely spending a lot of time in your head, okay? So water represents from an astrological archetypal perspective, the quality of emotion, or really emotional body. So when we're talking about water, and then these 3 signs, right, or archetypes: Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces, we are going to be referring to, we gotta feel here in order to heal, okay? So you're going to hear me refer to this several times, just so that we're not just conceptualizing things such as elements that are not necessarily to be conceptualized. They are to be felt, okay? Such as water. So empathy, intuition, nurturing, and it has a cooling or healing or cooling effect. So, okay, so this is just a slide on summarizing the fire signs: earth, air, and water, and then just some of the keywords here that I want you to keep in mind when you're tuning into wherever you have that Aries, Leo, and Sag. So I want to just pay attention if you have maybe more than one planet, and just send your awareness to Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. This is where we're going to be inviting you to energize and radiate. And what are we energizing? We're energizing self, right? In Aries, we're going to be energizing and radiating enthusiasm, and in Leo, radiating confidence. From Earth perspective, your Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, we are now stabilizing and integrating and embodying. So when we're talking about embodiment, we're actually referring to our Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, okay? And so what are we stabilizing and embodying in Taurus? We're embodying our worth, and you're going to hear us, we're going to talk about this a lot. And then stabilizing and embodying resilience and boundaries and integrity in Capricorn. And then stabilizing, integrating, and embodying our well-being and wholeness in Virgo, okay? Here, if you tune in, to just send your awareness to your, if you like, these orange signs, okay? So Gemini, Aquarius, and Libra, this is where we are going to ask you to connect more and idea share. So particularly if you have sun or moon in one of the air signs, this is important to keep in mind, or even your ascendant, okay, or midheaven here, which we're going to learn about. And then, as I said, as you send your awareness to the blue water, okay, so blue for water, green earth, green for earth, and red fire, okay, and then orange, for the lack of a better term, right, air, that is obviously does not have a color, but likely the closest color that we could actually perceive here on a piece of paper, other than, you know, yellow. That's why likely here they're using orange to represent air, right? So blue water, green earth, just to help you to remember that. So wherever we have water, where we have our Cancer, Pisces, and Scorpio, we got to, and you've heard me say this already, heal, right? And or really feel in order to heal. So we're softening into our really most feminine expression, and in particular, really the softest feminine in how I experience it in Pisces. That's our unity consciousness, that ease and grace, and very much the most holistic understanding of not just our well-being here and our connection on the planet, but even beyond that, right, in relationship with Source and the cosmos. So, okay. So just to see here a little bit about just one or two tidbit that we can recap on the elements that we have just learned about or refreshed, okay, or remembered. Maybe you've known some of this and now maybe it's just coming together. So this, you know, we've looked at some of the charts, we looked at Angelina's chart, and now this is that bottom left portion of that astro.com, right, chart that we call aspectarian. So I'm referring to this as the aspectarian or the aspectarian table. It's this part here where you've got all your planets listed and then all of that, those aspects here. And then you've got this other part here that we're going to refer to as the elements table periodically. And so at this point, I want you to just send your awareness in your own, obviously right now as you're paying attention here, and then after this, maybe take a look at your own chart and compare. Here, just notice, okay? So we're not going to be interpreting here a lot at this point. Do you have an abundance of red planets or planets in that red element, which is a fire? Here, there will be an F written on the left. Do you have an abundance of planets in air, in earth here, or water? Okay, we're going to touch on the cardinal, fixed, and mutable. That's just another quality of the energy. And so notice in Angelina's chart here, she has no planets in earth, and interestingly enough, no planets in this so-called fixed element, which is your Taurus, Leo, and Scorpio and Aquarius, but no planets in earth. So rather than interpreting that right now, and I'm just going to read actually a couple of quotes that she shared that I've found. So Angelina says, I don't like perfumes that are too strong or sweet. I like a fragrance that is earthy and sensual and can be worn at any time. Now, why would somebody with no earth in their chart, okay, say, I like a fragrance that is earthy and sensual and can be worn at any time? And then also she says, real food I have found is actually better than dieting. Okay. And then notice that no fixed element, and I'll touch on that in a moment in terms of what that really, how we could interpret that is also a couple of quotes by Angelina where she says, I cannot sit still. So if I cannot sit still, I gotta move, right? So there is, can you see how there is that movement, right? Which astrologically we connect. And she said, that's why we travel so much. Now, she does have a predominance of planets in the ninth, which we connect with travel and education and expansion. But a look at how many planets she has in the so-called cardinal, which is element, or rather modality or mode or quality that's connected with that pioneering and initiating energy, and then some in mutable as well. Most really in cardinal, which is the starter, okay? And a deep breath here. So those three modes, we've got cardinal, fixed, mutable. So the cardinal, fast and activating. So they correspond with the start of each 4 season. Your Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. Fixed are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. They correspond with the middle. So meaning the middle of the spring, right? So the spring, for example, the astrological year starts with the sun moving into Aries. Then sun moves into Taurus, which is when everything blooms, right? And it just feels like we are in the middle of the spring, basically. And then the season ends with the sun moving into Gemini, which is a transitional period or transitional part of the season from spring into summer. So the mutable, which is your Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces energy, as you may have likely experienced already, is more like I experience is more like a spiraling. It feels like a creative, but just really in movement, like a dancing energy, restless, ready for a change of seasons, the ending of a cycle, and more also importantly, flexible and adaptable compared to fixed. Okay. Okay. So just a little bit of a play here, and on the elements. I've got here more quotes by Dalai Lama. We're not going to go through all of them, but I want to just bring your attention here to the elements in the elements table of Dalai Lama's chart. And look at that fire here, compared to Angelina Jolie with lots of fire. Dalai Lama has 1, and that is Venus. This is a symbol for Venus, which is a fixed fire, okay, because that is Venus in Leo, and Leo is a fixed fire element, okay, is something we're going to refer as a singleton planet, meaning it's the only planet in an element. Now we can have our singleton in a modality here, or mode or quality as well, a cardinal, fixed, and mutable, but the singletons in a particular element are especially important to pay attention to, and then also where you have the abundance, and also where there are no elements, okay? We'll explore that more in other examples in the future. So we're just introducing that concept here, or reaffirming it. And look at that abundance of water. Remember, water stands for emotion, empathy, compassion. So we'll talk about that a lot when we talk about Dalai Lama, right? With the rising Cancer and the sun in Cancer. So ta-da, that brings us to the fundamental language of astrology here, and the so-called sign archetypes that we work with a lot. And so the fundamental thing here that I want to remind you of is that the signs are, and we talked about the elements, so they are also that, how of the energy, really, that the energetic in it's different, right? experiential, if you like, sensation in our body, and then also how we relate with it, and also that we can work with these different energies for different purposes. They obviously have a different purpose. Now the signs, we're going even more specific as to the unique elements of each of the 12 of these 12 energies, just like 12 different colors. So they're like the way of being, referred to them as the essence of life, the primary states of consciousness and energy templates. So they're the primary patterns of energy, okay? And they all offer unique processes of evolutionary growth. And with that, we get to a couple of slides here that I've created for you and you've seen this before if you have studied with me, a distilled version of your interpretation tool that you can use for all sorts of understanding of the planets and the angles and so on and so forth, but really distilled to the key energies and principles that I want you to keep in mind when we're working with these 12 energies. So action for Aries, but also, right, we've got leadership, courage, and you've got a number of here. I'm not going to list through all of them right now. Peace and pleasure and embodiment for Taurus, and simplicity, amazement, and a two-way engagement and a dialogue for Gemini, kindness, compassion, and forgiveness, and nurturing, of course, for Cancer, joy, heart, love, excitement, spontaneity for Leo, okay, well-being, healing, body, mind, wholeness. That body, mind, spirit integration is very, very much Virgo, and efficiency, harmony, peace, and balance, and teamwork for Libra. When we're talking about power, when we're talking about trust and intimacy and emotional honesty, in most cases we're either referring to Scorpio and or its modern ruler, which is Pluto, okay? It rules the elimination principle. Sagittarius for enthusiasm, positive expectation, ethics, and generosity and gratitude. Capricorn for resilience, results orientation, integrity, strength, very much, making our goals real as well as setting goals. That's very Capricorn and Saturn, its natural ruler. Aquarius for individuality, truth, freedom, nonconformity, and innovation, change and innovation. And Pisces for flow, ease, grace, and unconditional love, and of course, unity and multidimensional perspective. Okay, I also have some shadow expressions here, which I'm not going to go through right now, but they are beautifully distilled here. I'm just going to mention the first one. So we've got the frustration for Aries, excess for Taurus, overthinking for Gemini, enabling pattern for Cancer, entitlement pattern for Leo, worry for Virgo, people pleasing for Libra, right? It's shadowy expression, power over for Scorpio, prejudice, Sagittarius, self-deprivation, but also controlling pattern, right? There is a number of here principles to refer to when we're talking about Capricorn, and alienation for Aquarius, shadowy expression, and estrangement, and so on, and escapism and avoidance, if not addiction, addictive patterns for Pisces. Okay. Now, this particular slide is just in a more dynamic form, very, very much what I've just shared, but just letting you know, reminding you where you gotta, how to work with this in a more visual or experiential way. So where you see Taurus, what do we gotta do there? So, because I don't know about you, I like to know, okay, how do I work with that energy? What's the most effective expression, right, of that? So where you have Aries, gotta be bold and take initiative. Taurus, be at peace. So Gemini, we got to be more curious and adaptable and learning oriented. We'll talk a whole lot more about these different expressions and levels of expressions of each sign as we go through the examples and application and exercises. Being caring and compassionate where we have Cancer. Likeable where we have Leo. Now that's potentially a paradigm shift. If you've been taught that we don't want to, you know, let go of the need to be liked and approved. Well, if you got strong Leo, and by the way, we all have Leo somewhere in our chart, that is an area where we got to be okay with being liked and where we need that love and attention and approval and applause. Okay, positive affirmation if you like. We got to be more healthy where we have Virgo and organized, but social where we have Libra. Be aware of our power and our shadow and our potentially any toxicity and or toxic perceptions. In particular, we're talking about some of the heavier emotions that we may be working with and not releasing. Okay, so it's about emotional healing. Being enthusiastic where we have Sagittarius, being resilient, and being with Capricorn, and free where we have Aquarius. Okay? Ta-da! So that's our core understanding of the archetypes. And let's take a deep breath here. And now let's recap here now so that we can see, we can start finding this and applying this in an actual chart. Okay, so the invitation here when you look at Angelina Jolie's chart is to locate her ascendant or rising sign, right? It's right here. And this will be very similar and the same in your chart on the left-hand side where you have that AC. And in most charts, will have that ascendant on the left-hand side. Just always look for that symbol and that something that looks like an arrow or an axis. In some charts, they may do something different. They may start with Aries on the left, but in most, I think 90% of the time, I see that ascendant is on the left. And then can you locate here the second house cusp in Angelina Jolie's chart? Okay. And then here, what I've highlighted or circled for you is, can you see how here it says AC and then 2853? Well, if you're not sure, or let's say the second house cusp, we can see that it's a Leo pretty clearly here in a Leo, right? Because every sign has 30 degrees. And you can see these, 10-degree section. There's 30 degrees. So it's about that last, what we call a decanae of Leo. But if you're like, oh, I don't know exactly, let me double check, too tired to count. And no, you're not meant to count. But thank God, right? But you can see it right here. If you're not sure, no, it's pretty clear here. But sometimes when you have a cusp that's at the very end or beginning of a sign, it can be a little bit, especially when you're still getting used to reading a chart. Look at the aspectarian at the bottom. So you see here where it says 20, that circle is a degree, and then this is 20 degree of Leo, 49 minutes for her second house cusp, and 28 degrees of Cancer and 53 minutes for her ascendant in Cancer. Okay. And this is that aspectarian right at the bottom. I just had it cut, I cropped that portion there. Now you're gonna see here, these are actually, so obviously these are positions of the planets, right? All of the planets and the nodes. And then these are the aspects that I will periodically refer to. We talked about the elements table. And so this part here is, would be your cusps, but you only can see 6 of these sections. And it's because we have the polarities in a chart, right? So for example, when you look at Angelina's ascendant at 2853 Cancer, just by the virtue of this being a circle, right, on the polar opposite side of the circle, we're also going to have 2853 degrees, but of a polar opposite sign, which is Capricorn. So 12 divided by 2 equals 6, meaning when we know where her ascendant is, we, by virtual polarity, know where the 7th house cusp is, okay? So you've got here second house cusp, 3rd, and then MC or the 10th, 11th, and the 12th. Not to worry about these details right now if they're a little bit going over your head, but just so you know, you can remember where to find this information if you need to refer to it, okay? The last here part of understanding our basic alphabet is the houses. So the signs were the how, right? It's that energetic, those 12 energies that we work with. And the houses are the context, the where we experience life, the different stages rooms or really the arenas of our life. And yes, we can even place different rooms literally of our house in the chart, which we're not going to do for this course, but we do that for other courses, but primarily different areas of life and even different people that we obviously have in our life and all can project stuff too. Okay, and we can also place different parts of our body there, although we can also have our the signs also represent different parts of the body too. So here the invitation is just to, get a sense of, these 12 houses, the first 12, second, third, fourth, and so on. This is your 10th, This is where that midheaven is, or really the highest point in the chart. This is where typically if somebody was born at around noontime, depending on the location, the sun will be in their either 9th or the 10th house. Okay. We have different types of houses, and so I'm going to actually skip this for right now, but something you can get back to. We'll refer to this periodically when relevant, but it's a very similar here, angular, succedent, and cadent division of houses, very similar to the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th sign, like Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, and so on. So we've got action-oriented, security-oriented, and learning-oriented houses as well. And then we have life, substance, relationship, and houses of ending, which I also refer to as the karmic and or psychic houses. Now in traditional astrology, sometimes they're referred to as malefic, but just mention that here more as a reference point, but it's not a term that I use. Okay. So what are these 12 areas of life that we're talking about that we can place in these different sectors? So if I were just to use one word, maybe one or two here, I hope for one of them, it would be health for the first, wealth for the second, communication for the third, family in the fourth, creativity in the fifth, service in the sixth, relationships in the seventh, debt and a wound. Okay, so oftentimes referred to as the house of death, but it's a whole lot more than that. It's very esoteric. It's a metaphysical area and arena of our life, and also very relationship oriented, even though we place relationships primarily here. We'll talk a whole lot more. But you can think of it as, if this is wealth, this is where our wealth touches on somebody else's resources, whether through partnership and or loans and things like that, okay? So you can imagine this as a vulnerability area. So journeys in the 9th, career in the 10th, and or business, friends and associations in the 11th, and what is oftentimes referred to as the house of sacrifice as the 12th. Now this is here, if I had to choose one word, and also how it relates in a lot of modern astrology, so you can get a sense of it. But the integrated perspective here for the 12 houses is what I would like you to keep in mind for the duration of this course, and beyond if you so choose, okay? So we've got things like a positive self-image in the first, very personal and leadership-oriented, health, body, style, and vitality-oriented first house. Self-worth and net worth and values in the second, mindset and marketing and siblings we also place in the third. Father, ancestors, home and or homeland, and family and roots. By the way, very much also connected with our true self from my perspective. In the fourth, creativity, fertility, inner child, a leisure, love, and a little more than that as well. In the fifth, a very fun area and important of our chart, healing habits, daily work, duty, employees, skills, and pets. The sixth, if the first was our most personal house, then this, ourselves and our body, then the seventh will be what we are here invited to relate to. So it's our relationships, but also on any advisory capacity that we may have, and also where we can also invite that from others. So through consulting or offering consulting or receiving, also clients and teamwork and social skills. So this is where we begin to recognize our shadow. Well, the moon and other elements, we're going to talk about that in one of the, right in that particular class on the protocol for integrating the shadow. The 8th is shared resources and also deep trauma and taboo area, okay? 9th, higher mind, interfaith, adventure, international reach, big vision and travel, business, career, authority, public, visibility, and mother, we're going to be placing in the 10th. Social impact, sisterhood and brotherhood, friends and networks in the 11th. And past life, self-transcendence, house of retreat, therapy, subconscious, and dreams in the 12th. Okay. So just a little bit of here now, a visual of release, just what this perspective of looking at a chart from a local horizon, which is basically where we stand, and then as far as we can see, if we were to look at if there were no houses and buildings in front of us and we could actually see in front of us, there would be basically that horizon point, right? So anything that is invisible to us, the planets that we do not see in the sky, would be so-called beneath the earth, and in this sort of so-called invisible or more private sector of our chart, more subjective. And then anything that is in the upper part that we can actually see, that's in the so-called visible sky, is in the objective arena. Okay, and we actually refer to towards the ascendant as the east. From the northern hemisphere perspective, which is what most of the astrology in the Western world is, one way or the other, based on, and then the western part of the chart is in towards the 7th house. Okay, so just something that's going to maybe take a little bit of getting used to. We're not going to refer to that a lot, but just that if you come across that term. And then some key expressions of each field of experience here, of each house. I like to also know, what am I supposed to be doing, so that when you're asking questions, when you see a lot of planets in particular house, this is what can give you really, really quick glimpses and distilled invitations into what you got to do. If you have a strong 4th house, got to be leading, right? Where you need to be showing up more, emerging, deciding, getting clear, trailblazing, and developing the self, okay? Compared to the 12th, which is more about soul alignment. And the second, from a business perspective, is selling, but it's also about building confidence and building our self-worth into net worth, okay? And also being a contribution. The third, from a business perspective, we're promoting, but we're also keeping in touch, and we're increasing our messaging credibility, building a platform. 4th is about nesting and belonging, and a whole lot more that you can read here. 5th, about celebrating, if I had to pick one word, but it's also about enjoyment and leisure. 6th, about serving and healing, organizing, and integrating body, mind, spirit, streamlining. 7th, about relationship building. 8, and this is very important because I find a lot of, actually all of these, I find a lot of students, even including intermediate and advanced, that I find astrologers that still, when they describe these concepts, they're still struggling to explain why is this 8th house? How do we really help people understand why it is relevant? Not to be afraid of your 8th house, not to be afraid of your 4th or even the 12th house. Because why? We're healing our relationship wounds in the 8th. That is why. Any of the 7th house unresolved stuff in the 7th, we got to deal with that, right? Cross that threshold and build a deeper intimacy and really step into empowerment. And yes, we really got to meet and integrate our shadow in the 8th so that we don't get integrated by it, okay? In the 9th, we're visioning, getting in touch with our why, and really expanding our belief system, embracing diversity and higher learning. In the 10th, we're delivering. Yes, it's a house of career and business and visibility, but we also got to deliver on our promises. This is very, very important. If you get that, it's going to be so much easier for you to then say, oh, career and yes, and business and all of that in the 10th and visibility, but what do I got to do there? as well, right? So it's there. It has that Capricorn and Saturn element of accountability and integrity there, meaning we got to keep promises that we have made elsewhere. Let's say in the third. 11th about community building. So if you see a lot of planets there, or even one, there is that aspect of really connecting at a larger scale. We're going to see a lot of examples of those leaders who have planets there that have a larger following, and they really have a bigger desire to make a bigger impact. Okay, and Aquarius is similar, and in particular 11th house as well. And then we are soul aligning in the 12th and surrendering, right? Surrendering that egoic perspective, realizing God, goddess, and developing our psychic gifts, and really transcending that, once again, that personality perspective, and relaxing. We're also sleeping in the 12th. That's also what we can really relaxing, and then connecting with our astral body, if you like, and our multi-dimensional self. On the right-hand side, I have some people also that we relate to in these areas of life. So I'll just leave that for you to relate to. And some questions to explore through 12 houses. Okay. When you're working on really raising your awareness of who you got to be in that area of life. And at this point, hopefully, if you haven't already, when you look at the chart, that you can recognize that circle with the dot, right, representing the self and or the ego, if you like, and then the circle represented as the totality of self, and then the dot, depending on what perspective you look at it, can represent the ego, it can represent the true self and that individuality. Okay, this is typically how we write. When we say sun in Gemini, we can obviously spell it out, or you can say, you can have the symbol for sun and then symbol for Gemini, and all astrologers, and hopefully then you will, if you get to use the little scribbles and symbols, you can obviously shorthand in using the symbols as well. So moon in Aries. And then her Cancer ascendant. So these are your first steps in reading, is to identify in a chart your sun, moon, ascendant. And when it comes to sun and the moon, this is actually what we're really going to dive into in terms of how to work with that energetically and integrate that. So the ascendant is where the first house starts, the most important part of the chart, that where we build a relationship with our body image. I know a lot of astrologers and books talk about the first being obviously the health and the appearance, and it's our mask and all of those different ways. But what I really want you to remember, really essentially in my experience, what is so important and oftentimes not addressed enough, I believe, is seeing that first house is really your relationship with yourself, your relationship with your body image. And then also really where your core values are in terms of how you live your life. So really your lifestyle direction. Okay, in particular the ruler of the first, as I've got here, I call it your lifestyle director. Okay, so any planets in the first influence our body appearance and our first impression. And just here, one of the more zoomed in ways of at this point that you're really clear where to find that ascendant in a chart. And then also potentially any planets that you may have that are near the ascendant that we call rising, particularly when they're in the first. Sometimes we will refer to them when they're just behind that ascendant, such as in Angelina Jolie's chart, technically in the 12th, but it's just so very close, like let's say within even 3 to 5 degrees, we will still refer to them as rising, because they're just basically right there. Okay. And then I've got some slides for you that you can already start working with at interpreting the first, second, and the third house. And the key here, prompts that I want you, that you can work with, but by the way, we're going to be deepening this a whole lot more. So this is just to start having some fun, if you would like, is when you understand, it's like, okay, Milada, now I understand, I can find my ascendant, woohoo, right? What do I do with that? So you can start interpreting here by using this prompt, if you'd like. I chose to be born during the time that would allow me to be, and then simply use some of these keywords to get an understanding of how you are meant to show up so that you can be more relatable and develop a healthier relationship with yourself, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to leave that up to you for exploration, right? So choose to be born during the time that when I can be more active and passionate with Aries rising, when I can be compassionate and open and kind, right? And step into my feminine, or really embrace that more feminine perception with Cancer and or Moon rising, by the way, as well. And also from the perspective of intentions, core intentions and needs. The ascendant, as we're going to learn beyond obviously this class as well, is it is a non-negotiable from where I stand when it comes to sun, moon, and ascendant, which is why we're going to have a separate class just talking about the sun and the moon, and beyond that, and the ascendant, because they are really truly the anchors of the chart that helps us to become not just more integrated human being, but also to become more individuated as well, if you're looking to step into leadership, and also more to experience more fulfillment, okay, and heal, right, with your moon. So here the prompt is, I'm aware I need, meaning you already, the chances are you're going to be like chuckling because you're going to recognize your ascendant based on your core needs and values, even where your value system starts. Therefore, and this is the important part, I intend it no matter what. So this is the important part here, bringing this into conscious, not just describing yourself, as a lot of maybe books in how we interpret them or read them are about describing and categorizing. This is about conscious awareness, building your conscious relationship with that archetype that is, and principle that is on your ascendant. Okay? So, for example, when you have Libra rising, I tend to be friendly and look more elegant and diplomatic, right? And maybe have a balanced, not maybe, but let's consider to have that more balanced perspective. And you're going to find, if you have know anybody with Libra rising, why and how, I'm going to talk about this more later on, how relevant this is. There's a lot of people that I find with Libra rising, and the universe is interesting that way, that actually have a very strong Mars and Aries in their chart, or Mars and Pluto. So it's just very fitting that they would have to work consciously on being more friendly and more diplomatic, okay? So the second house is now where your value system rests, along with Venus being where and how we embody it as well as the ruler of your second house, that we've hopefully learned today how to identify that. But just start with the cusp, okay? If you'd like, at least with the ascendant, and if you want to explore the second, when you identify the second house cusp, I consciously value and desire to regularly invest in and prioritize from this place. These are some of the core gifts and your contribution in the world that is very, very important to know as really the gifts that you can rely on and potentially monetize if that is what you choose. Okay, really things that we're really, really good at that we could potentially take for granted. And so just the 1, 2, 3, which are the fundamental cusps to start and know the interpretation of, which we're going to be using over and over, is how you're here, the energy, the principle that can help you to even better articulate yourself and make yourself clear in alignment with that particular principle. So that principle, while your rising sign remains a foundation for how you show up, and that really first thing that people see, you know, in terms of your image, in terms of how you dress, and really even what you embody, even before you start speaking. But when you start speaking, this is where we gotta bring in this, what I like to call, that adds the element here of this to your messaging harmonic. I talk more about this in Astrology for Business, but we will also be referring to that here periodically, in particular when we talk about teachers and authors and so on and so forth, and transformational leaders. Okay, So let's look at some examples here in a recap of today. So just looking, we're not going to be interpreting the whole chart. I want you just for the purpose of this refresher, just to pay attention to the energies, right? And the core ones that we've learned today, the ascendant, and maybe where you know, based on the design where your eye is drawn, maybe there's few planets there. So say for Rosa Parks, which is the she's known as the mother of the civil rights movement. Capricorn rising, based on the slides, this is where she's got to be resilient, right? Stand in her integrity, set boundaries. And look at all, you know, that she's got that moon in the first, the mother of the civil rights movement with the moon in the first, right? And not just Capricorn. And we will look at Rosa Parks' chart again and again, probably at least one more, if not twice more. So it's not just the Capricorn rising, but also Mars in Capricorn on the ascendant, and how it is relevant for what she's known, right, for, and really as a representation of, or really that resistance movement to really taking a stand for what she believed in by not, you know, giving up her seat to a white person just because, okay? And look at that strong Aquarius here. So be free, so be resilient and be free, like very, very essential. We can bring it to you. And I mean, how relevant that will be, it is for her. I mean, obviously for other people that have planets in Aquarius, but even more for her because she's got 4 planets in the first. So talk about taking a stand, which is, as we're going to learn, an energy and a really way of being that we, and astrology, if you like, that we associate with Aries and Mars, which she has right on her ascendant. So also freedom, equality, individuality, and change are associated. So be resilient and be free, okay? Just at the fundamental level. Here is Angelina's chart and her perception on, perspective, really her quote on the Cancer rising. So when she says, I look in the mirror and I see that I look like my mother, and that warms me. I also see myself aging and I love it because it means I'm alive. I'm living and getting older. Don't love having a random dark spot from a pregnancy. Sure, I see my flaws, but what I see that I like isn't about a structure or an appearance. It's more that I see my family in my face. I see my family in my face. Right? So that is, I see my age. That is very, very much her Cancer on the ascendant. That's her relationship with herself. So basically expresses that importance of family in how she relates to and sees herself as a mother. Okay, just another perspective on Angelina's chart here. Just again, keeping this very simple way of looking at where we need to send that awareness and in what particular way and how we can connect in with that Venus. And by the way, we're going to be exploring this a whole lot more. So this is just to introduce you here to the idea of the working with these different dimensions of our psyche. So we're going to be learning how and where we need to make peace with ourselves as per the orders of our Venus, if you like, and how to embody that, and then also where we have Mars, what it is that we need to fight for, okay? So you can see how that relates to Angelina. John Lennon, similar to Rosa Parks, so he has that moon in Aquarius. So obviously for him, and moon, as we're learning, is one of the core of the 3, what we call the primary triad. We're going to learn more of that next time. Very, very, and it's right on top of the chart, right? So this is like one of the 2 planets that it's in that upper portion of his chart. So be free, be bold. Okay, he's got Aries rising. So remember that slide where I said that prompt to work with? So for him, it would sound like I chose to be born during the time that would allow me to be active and passionate. And absolutely, he was an activist. Now, not everybody with Aries rising would also be an activist, but John Lennon also has that South node that we're in Aries. which could indicate a past life as an activist and or warrior, okay? So, but look at all of that Libra energy here, where he needs to really choose to be more social and peaceful, and really well known for his poems and his lyrics, right? On famous of all time, right? Some of the most famous of all time, all we're saying is give peace a chance, right? How many times have we sang that with him and or have heard it? So both Sun and North Node in and Mars in Libra. Dalai Lama, we have already looked at. So be caring and be healthy. So Cancer is about compassion, and Dalai Lama is known as an embodiment of Buddha, an embodiment of compassion and forgiveness and acceptance. And this is really what he stands for. And we can see this so beautifully and powerfully astrologically speaking, in particular because of that sun, right? Which is the radiance. He's got to radiate that, is in the first. So it's somewhat like having a Leo along with Cancer rising on the ascendant. And then the sort of emotional hygiene, if you like, or the mental hygiene with Virgo, with the moon in Virgo in the third. And so just because, why did I pick these two? Because, we could have talked maybe about Saturn or something. Well, first, because we are learning that the sun and the moon are essential. So our focus is going to be always there first, I suggest. And then also because they seem to be two essential parts of the organizing principles of his design. So be healthy, but also, modest, of highest service, orderly, healthy, routine-oriented, which we know. And I've used Dalai Lama's chart in astrology and healing classes because for when we work on protocols, creating protocols, because we know his routine. He publishes his routine. It's on his website, literally for every hour of his day, what he usually tends to do and how important is that emotional health and mental health that he talks about. He actually just released a collaboration with a university that is pretty much a whole publishing educational platform on this integration of really the social, ethical, and emotional well-being. Okay. And also for Dalai Lama, where he's got to make peace in his right dialogue, communication, and also what he needs to fight and take a stand for. Fourth house, home and homeland, and yet in a peaceful way, because Mars is in Libra. Okay. And the last example for today, and by the way, these are just examples to introduce us. We're going to be, if anything, it's going to get easier from this point on, as we're going to be really dissecting and then also bringing this together more energetically through different exercises in the following classes. So Kamala Harris chart, I wanted you just to pay attention here to this very interesting. She's got, or rather, if you like, again, stop the video and see. I know I've got a couple of quotes here right in the middle that I wanted to draw your attention to, but what is your attention drawn to here, if anything? And then also noticing, right, these core elements that we're starting to talk about, the ascendant, sun, and the moon, in particular, the ascendant in her case, and because she's got the ascendant in Gemini and the North Node in Gemini as well. This is a pretty rare position and or aspect and a signature, and she's got it. So it's a very, very particular element that we will return to. Gemini stands for speaking and communication and dialogue, and Sagittarius for justice. So this is gonna be one of our integration keys, and that's the ascendant-descendant axis. And I wanted to draw your attention here to, this is the core thing, one of the first things that when you come to her website that is written as her slogan, it says, speaking truth, demanding justice. Speaking truth, demanding justice, with Gemini on the ascendant and North Node in Gemini and Sagittarius on how she's relating to the world and what she is here to basically provide and socially, and how she's here to socially connect. Okay. I also call that Gemini Sagittarius the education gap axis. And so it's interesting that she's been fighting, one of her primary things in her platform is that she's fighting for teachers. And that's very much a teacher archetype, both a Gemini and Sagittarius. And she talks about bridging that basically wealth gap, right, for and helping teachers as an important members really of society who are here to educate our children and so on and so forth, right? With her Mars in the third, what is it that she needs to take a stand for? Mars in Leo. Okay. So ta-da, that brings us to the end of this first class. And from this moment forward, the classes are actually going to be shorter, and they will have less information and more practical exercise. So you do want to be hopefully listening this in a maybe like more of a 2-day, maybe even 3 basically different sessions, and so that you can really get out of this what makes sense to you. Here are some quiz questions. If you are a beginner to intermediate, to explore what is the most abundant element in your chart. Right, when we talked about the elements, what is your ascendant, rising sign, and what house represents your physical health and personal image and style? If you are at an intermediate level, if you answer those questions with ease, then what is the traditional ruler of Scorpio and the co-ruler of Scorpio? What is the ruler of Dalai Lama's second house? And what element have you recognized as an important one to work with after today's class? And as a bonus point, do you have any singletons? So maybe you may find that a family member may have. And if you find it, ask me, okay, in the class, in particular if it's you. So, ta-da, and we arrive here to now, after doing those quiz questions, if you would like to start doing a little bit of a work on deepening your understanding of your ascendant, that is the invitation to identify your rising sign and 3 keywords that best describe your style and body image, and best describe your core daily intentions and needs based on the slide number 47 and 48. Okay. And a deepest breath here. I know this was a bit of information, and once again intended as a reference point and as a resource to come back to. Obviously, just skip the parts that are at this point maybe you already know. Although I am recommending to listen through this in particular if you do feel like you want to get a deepen your understanding of any of these fundamentals principles, such as the signs, houses, and planets, and the beginning of the interpretation as we get ready to dive in deeper into ta-da, Astrology of Wholeness and the core energetic integrity keys for increasing vitality and overall integrity of your energetic container, coming up in the next class, or really the official first new and deepened concepts with practicality and application of what we have started discussing here, and will develop more in the first class. Okay, so I hope that serves and inspires a perspective on starting to deepen your understanding of a chart and what is possible. And in particular, just based on the quiz questions, that's really where you want to focus in on. And if you can answer the beginner and the at least deepen there your understanding of the quiz questions in the intermediate quiz question slide, you are going to be really good for taking the next step, okay? And other than that, not to worry, because we're going to be developing more, deepening the understanding of these principles and actually simplifying it, and then also bringing it more into also where we can look at something that's complex in the chart and also bring it into more of a grounded and embodied expression, okay, where it makes sense for you. So with that said, huge hugs, and looking forward to reconnecting in the next class. Bye for now.